de kloostersite hier is ontstaan na de overwinning van de liberalen die de absolute meerderheid behaalden in 1878 en godsdienstonderwijs verboden in de gemeentescholen. En dan heeft een groot grondbezitter deze grond geschonken en de parochie heeft daar 2 klaslokalen opgebouwd.
Die dorpsschool die blijft eigenlijk functioneren tot de beginjaren 2000. Op dat moment zijn er te weinig kinderen nog in het dorp en wordt de school verlaten en dreigde de plek leeg te komen. En dat was voor het dorp eigenlijk zeer jammer, omdat die school niet enkel een school was, maar ook in de weekend een belangrijke plek voor de mensen van het dorp. Dus hebben we ervoor gekozen om met de inwoners van Meer het oude klooster te herbestemmen naar een dorpsplein.
Omdat ik zelf uit het onderwijs kom, was ik nogal geïnteresseerd wat er hier op de site aan het gebeuren was. Toen de schoolgaande kinderen hier vertrokken waren, heb ik me de vraag gesteld, wat kan ik eigenlijk betekenen voor deze site? Zo heb ik me geëngageerd om eigenlijk de gebouwen een beetje onderhoudsvriendelijk te maken, zodat ze toch nog konden gebruikt worden. Daar moest dan weer eens getimmerd worden of ramen hersteld. Allerlei kleine dingen die eigenlijk geen geld kosten, maar wel heel intensief waren.
De 5 historische gebouwen rond dat dorpsplein hebben we herbestemd naar functies die dat dorpsleven moeten ondersteunen. Enerzijds is de feestzaal herbestemd naar een ontmoetingscentrum met bibliotheek. We hebben een B&B, een theehuis en dan zijn er nog 2 gebouwen die we herbestemmen naar kantoren ter ondersteuning van de lokale economie. Samen met de mensen van Meer hebben we een partnership aangegaan met een sociale woningbouwmaatschappij die op de site hier een 17-tal woningen, sociale woningen, realiseert. Belangrijk voor die woningen is dat die eigenlijk de randen opzoeken van de site, zodat we centraal een grote publieke plek houden. Ten tweede zorgt het opzoeken van die randen ervoor dat we een soort omslotenheid en geborgenheid creëren voor de site. Als laatste ingreep is uiteraard het groen. Er is hier een fantastisch bos, er zijn dreven, er zijn grasvelden en die hebben we integraal gehandhaafd en hersteld waar nodig en ook publiek gemaakt, zodat de inwoners van Meer hier van gebruik kunnen maken.
Het is natuurlijk niet eenvoudig en een huzarenstuk om 13 partijen van het stadsbestuur, het agentschap onroerend erfgoed, 3 architectenbureaus, 5 aannemers, allemaal samen te brengen en die in dezelfde richting te laten kijken. Maar het is wonderwel gelukt.
Hello, Stijn. My name is Kate, Kate Seymour. I am the current chair of ICOMCC, which stands for the Committee for Conservation from the International Council of Museums. And we're very pleased to be here with you today. I'm representing Best of Heritage, and I would like to start by really congratulating you and your team on the fantastic work and the fantastic project that you've done. You won last year in 2023 the Europa Nostra Award for Citizens Engagement and Awareness Raising. And it must be so rewarding to have that recognition for the work of your company and the community in Meer in Belgium. And I'm here today to ask you a little bit more about the project. But first, can you introduce yourself, who you are representing, and then we'll talk a little bit more about the project.
I'm Stijn Kools. I'm a licensed architect in Belgium. I have my own preservation office, working in that sector for over, 15 years now. And I'm also a professor at the University of Leuven. And in our practice, Anno Architecten, which I founded in 2007, together with Sophie de Ridder, we exclusively work in the field of heritage conservation, and we are really looking for projects that contribute to urgent needs in society. That can be social, environmental, economical, a whole array of fields. And we believe heritage preservation has something to tell also in these areas.
I think this is wonderful progress, if I call it that, towards citizen ownership of cultural heritage. And I'm so curious to hear more about the project that you completed in Meer in Belgium. Can you tell us a little bit about the village monastery and how the project started and which stakeholders were involved?
Yeah, the project itself has a long history. We started with the project in 2007. So the fact, Meer in fact is a very small rural village, about 3,000 citizens. I think a lot of places in Europe are that. And they had a very specific site, an old monastery, and it was always used as the village elementary school. So lots of generations already since the 19th century, because the building was constructed in the 19th century. A whole history of Belgian school struggles. I'm not going to that, but so it was about 150 years old, and a lot of people from there went to school there. But in 2007, like many rural villages in Europe, the school was abandoned, so it was closed down. And in fact, it was the only public space in the village. The rest of the village was more like a road, a bit of widened road, but there was not really a market square or a central square. So it was the whole public life was developing alongside that main road, and also in the monastery. And there was a big risk that private investors would buy the monastery and make a project of it, and then the people of Meer would not have access anymore to that site. And then we came into contact with 5 villagers, 5 citizens, who said, we want to buy the monastery. They did not have any funding or money. They were just normal people. And they came to us and they asked advice for the refurbishment of the monastery and to think of functions and how we could do. And we soon found out that that was not the way to go. And together with the 5 villagers, we came up with another plan. And we said, let's take a cultural idea as the starting point of our project. And the cultural idea was, let's make the first square, the first public square in the history of the village. So because that was the cultural idea that we said, okay, we start from there. And that idea got a lot of momentum in the village. We didn't know what functions. We were not talking about adaptive reuse. We were not talking about preservation. We were just talking about, let's make the first village in the history of the little town. And that was the first idea, and that was really the starting point, the spark, let's say, at the time. And then it took another, I have to admit, 15 years or more to realize that idea.
I really value that village square aspect. I come from a small village in Scotland where we were 400 citizens in the village, and our village square, it wasn't really a square, it was a T-junction on a bridge, and it was so important that space was there. And there was free space without traffic as well, so that you could to work in it. Tell me a little bit more about obviously it was a monastery, but what was the original use of these buildings and who's used them over the centuries? Do you have information?
It was always a monastery, and the monastery was responsible for education. So the religious, the nuns, they organized the education for boys and for girls in the village for over 150 years. But then, like many religious functions or religious buildings in Europe, those communities shrink. So also there becomes a problem for these buildings. And so at that time, there was a problem of using these buildings, and the school infrastructure was moved to another village a bit farther away. So it was not a problem anymore. There was still education, let's say, in that area. But for the village itself, the little village, it was a kind of a tragedy, because it was always the central space for meetings in the weekend. The park in the weekend was a park. There were festivities. So the place was used, but always in the context of the monastery and the school. And there was a big risk that that would be lost. So I think the idea to propose the idea of the first square really ties into social encounters, and I think that's the whole project is about that. How do you organize social encounters in the village? And of course, heritage was a very good, tool in a way. Yeah. Because of course, heritage sites are always full of stories, histories, narratives. Everybody is in a way emotionally tied to those sites. So it is much easier to make such an idea of social encounters or a village square using historic buildings than you would say you're in an empty land and you say, now we're going to build here some modernist square. It would not function. Also, in retrospect, I think the whole process, which took 15 years from the start and then to little by little renovate and adapt and change, and the plans changed many times, I can't count them anymore, is that in fact, we already realized the square. As an architect, maybe strange to say, we already realized it in 2007, because the moment it was communicated that 5 villagers would buy the site, and they really put pressure on the council to give it away for free, basically, and not to ask money for it, but to say to the group of citizens, okay, you get the responsibility for 100 years. So they have a 100 years contract to be the owner of the site. Already then the villagers of Meer really thought, okay, now it's our site and we are responsible. And so the next day they were cleaning, they were taking away the graffiti, repairing leaking roofs. So it was really the appropriation of the site by a community that really changed something. And so, of course, then a process started from getting funding, finding appropriate functions, making preservation permits, and so on, thinking about what functions are appropriate. And that was also a big discussion, but for the community of the citizens and also for us as ANO, it was a no-brainer, was saying, okay, let's do housing on the site. Because if we're talking about a village square, we need housing. Because we want live 24/7. We don't want something for tourists or for weekends. So then we teamed up with a social housing company. And so we proposed to do 17 social housing units for social goal. So they could also participate in the village life. And for the authorities of monuments and sites, also for them it was a no-brainer. So everybody was quite surprised that they said, oh, they're gonna build really in the historic perimeter of the site, which was a protected landscape. But also they started making reflections on the idea of the bigger narrative, the first village square of Meer. And so other agendas were softened. And so that was very nice to see that they really were a partner from the beginning, and they really supported that idea. So I would say I always say with a bit of statement, preservation was not about preservation in this case. It was a result. It was the result of an idea. And of course, we meticulously restored, and it's a fantastic project also on that respect. But the idea was not the first idea was not let's restore the buildings and we want a lot of subsidies or something to do it. It was the consequence of of another idea, and I think that's why it's really so nice. And also, maybe I'm talking too much now, but that's also why it was so important for the people of Meer that they got the award of Europa Nostra.
I think I'd like to ask you later to talk a little bit more about the current functions are within the buildings in the square. But we were also curious if you thought that what were the qualities and innovations that impressed the prize jury that gave you the award? And I think you've just touched on it now.
Yeah, the word we use for it is the idea of care. So care for something, and of course in the heritage preservation sector, in which I'm operating, that's a word which is everywhere. But we often look at it from an archaeological point of view, which mean caring for buildings, like in the classic preservation theories and international charters, is observed as let's say a tool for to mitigate cultural loss or something, to care for something and to take care. It's also care also means efforts to do really detailed studies and surveys and all of these things. But I think care in this case was ask other questions like, for who are we doing the projects? Where are materials coming from? Who is doing the labor on the site? What should architects care about? So that were the other side of care, like the more relational side. And of course, it's unique in the sense that you rarely have projects where the both really connect. Of course, there are many examples, but where you really are from first hand witnessing a bottom-up initiative, getting like a whole, creating a whole world with that idea of care, material care for the buildings, for the heritage, for the history, but also like a social care for the next generations of the village.
Yeah, I love this idea of care. And I mean, I'm an easel painting conservator. And for me, conservation is care. I'm caring for an object. And we talk a lot analogies of the object suffering and undergoing damage. And I think that these all tie in together. So I think it's a wonderful idea, and it links very closely to living heritage. I mean, it is these buildings are not static. They live, they have a history, a narrative, a story, an age. And I just love the idea of changing function, but creating function that is speaking to the current needs and uses of the community that are there. So can you tell us a little more about the types of building? What are the functions of the buildings now?
So we have a monastery. We have 3 old school buildings, and they had a community hall. That were the 5 historic buildings. And discussing with the people of Meer, we were looking for functions that would strengthen the idea of a central square. So we came up with a bed and breakfast, a tea house, a bakery, a library, some office buildings, and then also, and that was I think is also very nice, then we also convinced the mayor of the city to create a service center. It's maybe not the best translation, but it's something in Belgium you can get subsidies for make in communities, which rural communities, where the bakery is going away, the hairdresser, the doctor, everybody goes in at other places. But you can get subsidies to make a kind of a center where all of those people, those services, they come during the week, once a week, twice a week, or once a month, and the people can still use these services. So that's one of the buildings that really has that function, and also functions as a meeting space for the people of Meer to do festivities, to do a meeting, council meeting, things like that. So we tried really to look for functions that supported the idea of where public function that supported the functioning of the square. So in the whole discussion on adaptive reuse, we also in our office, we like to put an additional view on that, and that we call effective reuse. So it's not only about adapting a function and finding an appropriate function, but there's always a sort of emotional connection or an extra layer why this function is better than the other one. And there, of course, it was to what extent does the function contribute on an emotional level, on a history level, or a narrative level, or whatever, to the idea of the central square. So the adaptive and effective reuse, we could say.
Oh, it's fantastic. And I guess also that you revitalize the landscaping around the square and the buildings as well.
Yes. We try to push the new construction, so the new housing construction, we push to the sides, really to the edges of the site, to maximize the open space and to keep the open space. There's also an ancient forest. We of course completely conserved and preserved. The open landscape we preserved. So the open landscape was as important as the buildings and as a function. So it's really the mineral, let's say the mineral square, and then the open, green, lavish garden surrounding those buildings. And they work together, of course. People walk their dog. In the weekends, you have picnics, things like that, in that setting of that monastery, which is fantastic, of course.
Yeah, your video, I've watched it a couple of times because it's so enticing and attractive to come to see it. So I'm not so far away from you, so it's on my bucket list now to come to.
That's good. That's good.
Thank you so much for sharing this information and this insight into the project. I hope that you are continuing in this line and have other projects in the pipeline. I don't know if you have any last words to share with the audience and maybe explain about other projects, or
maybe the last word. I think the project is an example of imagination. I think the imagination of villagers to do better for their community, and then really to, even if it takes 15 years, that in the end it's rewarding. And I think a lot of rural communities in Europe could learn from the people of Meer that you don't have to wait until there's a top-down initiative, but you really can, by capacity building from below, you really can change things. And then even if it takes 15 years, in the end, everybody is joining you and supporting you. And I already said it, they were very, very emotional about getting the Europa Nostra award, because for them it was the first time somebody out of their community said, you did a really good job. And that was for them so important, because if you're working on a project like that for 15 years, people even lost their jobs for it, because they were during office hours sketching and calculating and things. I can write a whole book of it. So also in the village, they were like criticized, like, the project is still not running? What are you doing? You will never succeed. But they kept on pushing. And so for them in the village now to have that recognition, and last week they got a national prize from the Belgian government. For them it's so important, and they really cherish that award. And I think it's also nice that Europa Nostra can have that influence or demonstrate that it's really like supporting those initiatives, and which is welcomed, of course, by those people.
Well, I think it's a very well-deserved recognition, and congratulations to them.
Thank you.
Congratulations to your team, and I admire so much the perseverance, and I like this slow conservation approach as well. So thank you so much for joining us today, Stijn, and
See you next time. Okay.
See you next time.
Bye-bye.